Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to the Econobox garage. Come on in. Well, I have to say it's been really nice to be able to work with the garage door open with the temperatures warming up. And next on the agenda is getting the dashboard in. I've got the draft excluder started with the P-clips underneath at each side. So once I'm getting closer to the finish, I'll run this all the way around and it'll come up to here. So that's on both sides. I've got my bolts and what have you all cleaned up. So there's a bolt that goes through the little hole up in there. That's this one here. There's a stud on the underside of the cowl under here. I don't know if that'll show up or not. It's up in here somewhere. So that's for that. There's these two brackets that go from the firewall to the underside of the dashboard. There's the bolts for that, all cleaned up. Actually, these are more of a Phillips head screw. And yeah, so I've got those all ready to go. The dashboard's all ready to go. So let's get this dashboard in the car. Well, here I'm starting to install the dashboard. I found that I could do it with the steering column surround in place by just tipping the top of the dashboard in underneath the front lip first. And what I'm doing is just trying to line things up with the center stud and also getting the heater cable through the correct hole in the firewall. Once I've got all that done, it's a matter of getting the nuts and bolts on either side, putting in the screws and washers on the two little braces that go underneath. This clip's running at about 5 times actual time. I'm quite happy with how this has gone in. I'm very thankful that I heeded the advice for doing the wiring behind the dash beforehand. Well, I have the dash loosely in place. I've got the bolt in there. You can just see it in there. I've got the brackets underneath screwed into place. I've got the nut on the center stud, and I have it loosely attached at the other end as well. Now I have noticed I've probably got these P-clips here upside down, so I'm just going to readjust those and then move forward from there. I'm adjusting the P-clips for the draft excluder so that they're not visible. So initially I had them oriented this way, but what I'm going to do, and I've already done on the other side, is instead of orienting it vertically, I'm going to orient it horizontally so that the clip itself won't be seen, and it'll have the same effect without having to change anything down along here. So I've got the P-clip now installed in a horizontal position behind here, and you can't see it. As compared to when I had it before, you could see the bottom of the P-clip here. So that's much better, and quite a bit happier with that. And if you look over on the other side, over here, you can't even see that P-clip from over here. So the next little bit is going to be getting all the bits and pieces wired up and into position and out of the way. Well, I get to knock some stuff off my checklist here. So I've wired up the dash and crossed that one off. Still have to do all of this other stuff. With the wipers and washers, I've installed the gearboxes. I've installed the nozzles. I'm still looking for the bottle, and I just picked up the hoses. So we're good to go on that one. So there we go. A couple more items off the list. So now that I have the dash roughly in place, or loosely in place, I can get underneath and put all the wiring where it needs to go. I can run the choke, or I can run the starter cable. It goes through this hole. Choke goes through the small hole over there, and then through the firewall. But first of all, I'm going to get underneath and get the main part of the harness into the two clips across the back there, and then through that hole there and the firewall. I think once I've got all the loose bits in behind here, I'll tighten up all the bolts and studs and screws and that hold the dash into place. I've already run the wires for the wiper motor out through the firewall. Next up, I'm going to run the choke cable. So that goes through this hole here and comes out this hole here and then makes its way over to the carburetors. Well, there's the choke cable installed, and I think it looks nice with the vinyl on there. It was well worth the effort. One thing I am going to have to do is shorten this up a little bit, because it's going to sit up way too high. Otherwise, we'll have to shorten it down so it comes in right around there, because I have to go into this little spot right here. As I mentioned earlier, I got this from Bugeye guys, and he did say that you'd probably have to shorten this so it stays clear of the hood or the bonnet and doesn't interfere with the operation of the choke. So now the choke cable's in, I'm going to work on the starter cable. But before I do that, I'm going to get underneath and get the harness secured to the firewall and through, because I believe that the starter cable goes underneath the harness. So pre-wiring the dash is a very good idea, but it doesn't eliminate having to get on your back and work underneath there. It greatly reduces that. So now it's a little tight to get this nut and the washers on, this stud that's up in behind the signal light switch. So I'm going to pull that switch out, give myself a bit more room, then I can get the nut and washers on the stud up in behind there. So I'll get those things done, and then I can get back to the starter cable. Well, kind of hard to see, but I do have the wiring secured up underneath the dash. I do have to look at tying this stuff up. I'll just probably use some zip ties to do that. But now I'm going to get the starter cable put in, and that goes in this hole here and comes out. So this hole is not used. This is where the starter cable is going to come through, and this is where the brown wire in the harness is going to come through and hook up to the battery. And then this hole here, as I mentioned, isn't used. This hole here is where the oil pressure line and the water temperature line goes to the combination gauge, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So let's get that starter cable in. Okay, there's the starter cable into the dash, and it comes through up top here. Put a grommet on there, and this will get hooked up to the solenoid, which mounts on this bracket down here. And you can see the heater cable here comes out of the hole over in behind the battery box, and that'll hook up to the hardware underneath here. Well, here I've cleaned up and installed the starter solenoid or starter switch, and I've tested it and it's working okay. And then this grommet on the side here, or this bracket on the side, is where the tachometer cable will go through once it comes off the back of the generator, which mounts in right around here. To connect the end of the starter pull cable to the shaft on the starter solenoid is this little piece of equipment here. On one end it's a big opening that goes on this shaft here, and on the other end there's a bit of a tapered opening and a smaller diameter hole, and that allows for this cable here to get inserted and centralized. And the idea is there, you get one end on the cable, or get the cable into one side, the shaft into the other, and then you tighten up the screws, and that gives you your starter. One of the things I need to hook up are the hoses for the washer pump. I went to Lowe's and picked up some 1/8 inch inside diameter clear pipe. So there'll be 3 sections of that, 2 of which run from the back of the pump up to the nozzles, and then the third one will run through the firewall and over down the side of the engine bay into a bottle, which will sit into that bracket right there. Don't have that bottle, and I'm on the lookout for that. Okay, so I've added a grommet in the firewall where the hose comes through, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be a couple of P-clips required down the routing of this, and there's already the holes in the side of the wheel arch here. So now I've given myself a lot of slack at this end, so I'm going to get in underneath the dash now and hook that hose up. I have the 3 hoses hooked up to the washer pump. One for the supply and then 2 for the nozzles, and they're hooked up up under the cowl. It's hard to see up in there. And then I've also got the wire that provides power to the ignition switch through the firewall with its grommet, and then that will eventually hook up to the battery, which sits right in here. So the next thing I'm going to install is the tachometer cable, or the tach drive. This end goes to the back of the generator, which I have yet to install. It then goes through this bracket here, beside the starter solenoid, goes between the battery and the heater box, and then takes a turn and goes through this hole right here into the back of the tach. So I'm going to get that run. I have to go through, start this way, and then go around. The small end goes up to the tach itself. There's the 2 grommets, one through the firewall and then one to hold it in place on this bracket down here. Well, here you can see the tach cable coming out of the firewall. It'll go around behind the heater box. Battery will go in front of that. It comes around through the grommet in the bracket here, and then this big end will attach to the gearbox on the back of the generator. Okay, so another item checked off the list. I've got the wiper motor hooked up according to the manual, and I have the P-clips in place for the wiper tube. So there's 1 here and then 2 on the wheel arch here. I've left plenty here to go to my bottle whenever I get that. I do need to figure out a grommet for here. This is where the oil pressure line and the water temperature line come through for the combo gauge. Anyway, definitely making progress, but I think that's all I have time for this week. I'll finish off the combo gauge in the next episode. So if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to share it with your friends. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget that little bell icon. Click on that, you'll get notified when the next video comes out. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.